Allies. Canada was the primary location of the British Commonwealth Air Training Plan, still the largest Air Force training program in history. Over 167,000 Commonwealth Air Force personnel, including more than 50,000 pilots, trained at the air base in Canada from 1940 to 1945. More than half of the British Commonwealth Air Training graduates were Canadians who went on to serve with the Royal Canadian Air Force and the Royal Air Force. 1 out of the 6 Royal Air Force bomber command groups flying in Europe was Canadian.
Early in the war, Japanese troops invaded Alaska. Canadian Air Force planes flew anti-submarine patrols against the Japanese. While on land, Canadian troops fought side by side with American troops against the Japanese. Eventually, the Japanese were repulsed. When Canada declared war on Japan in December 1941, the non-Japanese population of British Columbia, including municipal government offices, local newspapers, and businesses, called for the internment of the Japanese. In British Columbia, some claim that the Japanese residents who worked in the fishing industry were charting the coastline for the Japanese Navy, and many of their boats became confiscated. The pressure from the public was so great that in 1942, the government gave in to the pressure and began the internment of both Japanese citizens. Those unwilling to live in internment camps faced the possibility of deportation to Japan. Canada sent the males to road camps in British Columbian interior, to sugar beet projects on the prairies, or to internment in a POW camp in Ontario, while women and children were moved to 6 British Columbia towns. The living conditions were so poor that the citizens of wartime Japan even sent supplemental food shipments through the Red Cross. Soldiers of the Canadian Army fought in the Battle of Hong Kong in 1941 against the Japanese, and in the disastrous Dieppe raid of 1942, when the 2nd Canadian Division, supported by British commanders and a small unit of American Rangers, launched a failed landing at the French port of Dieppe. It was planned so that they take over the port for a short period of time to test the possibility of gathering intel from prisoners and capture materials, and to examine the reaction of enemy forces. As the plan was being made, the Allied forces had trouble keeping it a secret, and they still went on to follow their original plan.
After the Dieppe raid campaign in 1943, Canadian soldiers went ashore in Allied invasion of Sicily and mainland Italy, and then fought through the long Italian campaign. A combined British-Canadian-American invasion of Sicily began on the 10th of July 1943 with both water and airborne landing at the Gulf of Gila. The Canadians helped greatly throughout the campaign, capturing the town of Ortona and playing a vital role in breaking the Gothic line. During the course of the Italian campaign, over 25,000 Canadian soldiers became casualties of war. On September 9th, forces of the U.S. Army expecting little resistance landed against heavy German resistance at Salerno. There had been a hope with the surrender of the Italian government, the Germans would withdraw to the north, since at the time Adolf Hitler was convinced that the southern Italy was unimportant. However, this was not true. The 8th Army was able to make relatively easy progress for a while, up to the eastern coast, capturing the port and the airfields around Foggia. The main Allied effort in the west was centered on the port of Naples, because it was the northmost port city that could be taken under cover of Allied fighter aircraft operating from Sicily.
After years of planning, the invasion of Europe had been set for June 5, 1944. Secrecy was maintained until the very last moment when the fleet was ready to set sail, but then everything had to be stopped. Weather reports over the coast of Normandy were terrible.